3. Okay. I guess I should play the right music.
You're listening to All Things 3D, where we talk about the world of fabricating, designing, and capturing in the third dimension.
Hi, this is Mike, and today we've got a special guest, and that is Sean Beeson, who's done some excellent music. And in fact, I thought I'd play something in the background for you. Some time ago, what has it been, about 7 years now? I had made a request to Sean to help me do some music for this trailer for a documentary that never got made. But if you listen closely, you'll hear his music that he's famous for. He creates some very, very spatial, powerful music. Asked him to do something along the lines of Highlands type music theme, painting flying colors. Again, this was our little quick trailer that we made. So I'll finish through, and then I'll actually go to one of the images of him himself. Maybe you can explain it a little bit. This image, is this actually in your cornfield?
Yes, yeah. It is. It's in the cornfield right behind my studio on our property.
Okay. So there he is, Sean Beeson. You know, you kind of look like the guy in Game of Thrones that no longer is with Game of Thrones, but I guess he was in The Hobbit, so don't know if you've been told that already. You need to have a little furrow like I have in the middle of my forehead to accentuate, but maybe you do when you get a little tense. But today we're going to introduce Sean Beeson, and I will let him kind of introduce himself at this point. Hi, Sean. So, Sean,
Hi.
Who are you? Where do you live?
Yes, yeah, I'm a composer.
What do you do for a living?
I'm a composer. I'm a composer who lives in rural Ohio, kind of in the middle of nowhere, between Columbus and Cleveland, and I write and produce music and sounds and audio for games and films and television, trailers, really anything that moves. I've worked on ballets, I've worked on concertos, I've created piano albums that have been successful online. I dabble in just a little bit of everything.
I'm going to play this in the background as you're talking. This is Magic the Gathering, so I guess it's the kind of music that you work with. Let's see if make sure that I've actually got the music playing.
The moment you step outside the safety of your homes,
you can hear that, right, Sean?
The fight has
Yes.
just begun. Is it when you comprehend how small you are compared to the vastness of what threatens to destroy you? When did you learn?
So kind of tell us, what goes through your mind when you do this? Do you see the visuals first, or do they just give you a concept and you kind of have to put something together? You know, I can only speak of from an illustrative or a graphic perspective. I just have something in my head. Do you have a similar process that you go through when you do your compositions?
Absolutely, yeah. With these Magic the Gathering trailers, I think I've probably done 10 or 12 of these, and it's a company out of Columbus called Space Junk Media that they take the art from the cards and they animate and digitize the art on these cards, and they create these really just amazing trailers from them. And so they were always great enough to bring me in very early to the project, so I would get, in some cases, I would just get pictures of like the art from the card, where it would not even be, it wouldn't even be moving, but I would just get a rough recording of the dialogue so I could hear the story, and I would get kind of their thoughts on where they want the music to go. And they, Space Junk, along with Wizards of the Coast, they were very flexible with my ideas of how I want to approach the music to kind of create the environments and create the sounds in the trailers, and it resulted in quite a few really good collaborations.
Yeah, they're fantastic, and I've also noticed, and I'm going to go ahead and play another one for our audience. But you also do music videos, or actually maybe you can tell me a little bit more what this one is now that I'm not sure it starts from the beginning. I've kind of noticed a little bit of a trend that you like chanting. Is that just something that other people have picked up on and said, hey, I saw that chanting in that. I'd like a little bit in this. I think it would be perfect.
I think I do a lot of chanting just because it goes back to the roots of a lot of my interest in music and in composition, which is sacred music, is liturgical music that you would hear in a church or hear in very old hymns and old psalms. And so I kind of refer back to that a lot in my own music. But in this case, the guy skateboarding is actually a friar, and he actually did the chanting. And this company out of Chicago, they asked me to remix his singing. So I just got a recording of him singing a cappella and had to kind of dress it up and tune it different ways and cut it up and slice it up. And this is kind of the result, that they edited the music video around the music that I basically did a remix of his solo vocals. But it's also nice to do chanting too, because when you have singing and you just don't want to have ahs and oohs the whole time, and you need it to sound a certain way, but you don't want to bother with writing text or writing words. Chanting's kind of nice because it sounds mystical, it sounds rich, it sounds deep, but in reality, a lot of the chanting that I use in my pieces is just mishmash of Latin and gibberish and vowel modifications, just to give a sense of more richness to it.
And it does, and it's very impressive, but it also seems to be a trend with a lot of fantasy games, so it just kind of fits your niche there. And I've noticed that, I don't want to spend a lot of time just showing trailers and music. I want to talk to you about some of the more technical perspectives. In myself working with you, I know that you're really technical, and maybe that's what musicians have to be today. So you pretty much know the equipment you're working with. So kind of give us a rundown in your studio. What's your process? What's the piece of software that you value the most? And then we'll get into the technical side of why I had you on here, is that obviously there's something new coming out, not necessarily coming out, but it's becoming more explosive with the Oculus Rift, and that's VR. And I'm just wondering, you probably have seen this movement, and what kind of ideas, and maybe we can kind of toss some of the engineering, or the, as they call it, sound field terms around, and kind of get your feedback on it and how you would approach it. So let's start with what's in your studio, and what do you work with on a day-to-day basis?
Yes, my studio is it's all virtual, unlike music studios, or maybe a more traditional view of a music studio that has a bunch of flashing lights and knobs and mixers and a lot of hardware. I'm all digital. I'm virtual, so my whole studio is really just right there. I'm just set up with a couple speakers, a couple LCD screens, and a very, very high-powered workstation computer that's loaded with a bunch of different kind of software and samples that help me render what I'm putting digitally into the computer. Think of it as like recordings of performers that are already made, where somebody's recorded string players doing all these different sounds, and I'm simply triggering how those sounds are being played. So my whole studio could fit in probably in an 8 by 6 foot square, compared to maybe, again, a traditional studio that would require hundreds of square feet and tons of cables. It's
Now, when
very
you say
minimal.
virtual, obviously that entails software. Are you a Windows environment or a Mac environment?
I am. I am a Windows user. I mean, really, I'm agnostic about it. I'll go wherever I can get the most power, the most value. And currently, there's not too many benefits of using a Mac with what I do unless you just prefer the platform. A lot of the software has now become multi-platform. So Cubase 8
Is that
is
what you
made
use
by
on there?
Steinberg, and that is kind of my tool that I absolutely need. Kind of like GarageBand on steroids.
Yeah, I actually use it as well if I'm doing multi-tracking, but normally I have to mix down for these podcasts, so I don't have to use it a lot. But if I'm doing a mix down for a podcast from, let's say, a studio recording, I normally record each track separately, and then you have to use something like Cubase or something a little more sophisticated than what's the main go-to on Windows that most Audigy? No. It's that little free program that most
Mhm.
people are aware of who start out in podcasting, and then they kind of
Yeah. Audacity.
Audacity. Thanks.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
obviously everybody's got it who does this. So just so basically, you're Cubase or Cubase. Yeah, there we go. And I noticed in your studio that not only do you have some mics, but you have some things on the wall. Are those speakers or are they just sound deflectors?
Mhm. They
They
are
are.
bass traps by Gig Acoustics, and they're designed with acoustics. Being in a square room is not ideal. I'm actually in a cube, which is even worse. I'm kind of in the process of tearing a couple walls out and lengthening a room. But the bass traps help to absorb some of the bass frequencies, and you strategically place them opposite of where your speakers are pointing and behind them, and it's supposed to help. But I think when you're in a wood room that's square, there's not a whole lot you can do other than just trust your eyes, what you see, trust your ears, and listen on multiple speakers and get feedback. And even then, you're
Do you
still going to
use
have problems.
do you use headsets a lot, or do you try to use just your monitors?
I try to use just my monitors. Yeah, I think a lot of earphones and headphones or cans or whatever, they tend to color the image, and I do need to invest in a very high quality pair that are reference headphones that will kind of enable me to get a better image, especially when working with three-dimensional audio. I think that's kind of important because that's how a lot of it's going to be heard, at least in the industries where I do a majority of my work.
Well, let's kind of segue into that. What is the majority of your work? And then you mentioned sound field or sound image. What are we talking about there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a majority of my work right now is in mobile gaming. It's in the mobile arena, doing games or trailers for games, doing slot machines, but it's consumed primarily on mobile devices. Even my website and my stuff on YouTube is seen more on mobile devices than what it is on any other specific platform. So I consider myself a mobile composer. I don't like to limit myself to that. But when I reference like a stereo field or a stereo image, I'm talking with music. In regards to music, I'm talking how the music is laid out, how the orchestra is placed in front of the listener as if they were listening to the orchestra. And if you're talking about sound effects with a lot of games, you just tend to have left and right channels. So the sounds can be panned or manipulated in such a way that it can simulate three-dimensional audio.
So when you say simulate, and this is probably the heart of our interview here, obviously that's going to be something really big, since I'm thinking VR is going to be very important in the future. Oculus Rift supposedly is going to be releasing their consumer version November 2014. It's supposed to have a QHD or even 4K type image, so it's going to be of high quality for a very reasonable price. with that being said, there are a lot of companies who are creating immersive type videos now. I don't know if you've had an opportunity to play with the Google Cardboard or heard of it, but there was a Paul McCartney song that was done from one of his concerts called Live and Let Die, which we've talked about on our previous shows, 3D in Review. And one of the interesting things in not only watching it is that the sound also is modified based upon the positioning of your head. And the reason they can do that is that inside these goggles or these phones you have accelerometers and gyrometers that allow you to know the positioning of your head. So then you can modify the sound field. So with this being the case, are you having to look at that yourself when you're doing your music, as well as maybe if you're working with other type of sounds, so that now that the audience can move their head, do you see that maybe in your music compositions, that if they turn around, maybe the sound gets a little softer, or maybe if they go into a cave, your music changes based upon the acoustics of the cave? Now, are these things that you look at, or do you try to keep a kind of a basic tonal for the background music, but maybe if you're involved in the environment sounds, that may change?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great question, and a lot of it depends on the context of the app or the game, and depends on what the client needs specifically. A great example is like slot machines. I've worked with this company, multiple companies that do slots, and in the past, when you've held like an iPad, they want the sounds to be just like you are playing the game directly, and the sounds are coming from your iPad, and it's not necessarily like you're playing a slot machine in Vegas. And lately they've suggested trying to do some of that more immersive audio, and I can very easily see it going towards three-dimensional audio, where you can actually move around and maybe not have a full freedom of motion or 360 degrees of motion, but in that kind of a case, the sounds need to be completely different. Instead of having the sounds be in your face and be very direct and dry, they need to have more of a roomy sound, or need to take on the characteristics of the acoustic space that they're in. And there's a lot of different ways that can be done with sounds or with music, which we'll talk about. But on the flip side, if you're talking about like a war game, and a character has on some kind of three-dimensional glasses, or has on something that immerses them in the game, and they're getting shot at and they're moving around, there's already going to be enough of the audio field that's kind of swishing around their head, going around all over the place, that I think sometimes having the music be stationary is maybe better, because it's not going to be as orienting if that music stays stationary. And sometimes I think that's easier too for the mix, especially with everything being multi-platform. That's where it gets kind of tricky, because you don't know if somebody's going to be using an iPhone, or if they're going to be using a really cheap LG Android phone, or they're going to be on a Samsung phone. It's kind of hard to determine that. And so middleware, there's lots of middleware that's emerging, and different things that enable kind of the composers or the sound designers or the audio engineers to prep their material in anticipation for the various platforms. But at this point, there's not as much of a standard. There hasn't been anything that's been standardized, especially for the mobile arena, in terms of three-dimensional audio with kind of like the Google 3D and stuff like that.
Yeah, I'll have it in the show notes, but I'll go ahead and stay on our images. But there's a company, and I sent you the link for it, called Jaunt, and they're the ones that are creating these VR experiences, immersive experiences with Google Cardboard and also with the Oculus Rift, that allow you to experience let me actually, well, I don't have that screen captured, so I'll pop back to you and then bring it back up. But maybe, I don't know if you had a chance to actually look at the link, but it appears that they use not only a sphere with, it appears like 24 cameras, but they talk about 3D sound capturing. Could you kind of enlighten us a little bit, since you do work with capturing audio, not only composing it in the virtual space, but you're probably very familiar with mic and positioning. How would they capture, a full 360 immersive field?
Yeah, there's different kinds of mics and recording techniques, and while I'm not sure what they use specifically, there's a couple different approaches they could take that I think anybody that's interested in doing this kind of audio could also explore. Microphones have different polar patterns, like that is kind of the direction of how it's recording, from like a shotgun mic, which is very directional, to a cardioid mic, which has a slightly bigger polar pattern, the degree angle of what it can capture, all the way up to microphones that have omnidirectional, so it just captures 360 degrees around the sound. I would imagine that to get the best three-dimensional sound, you could do a couple different strategies. One would be to set up multiple microphones that are in a circle, or wherever the center of where you want to record is, if you're not going to be doing a lot of moving around in your application or your video. Setting up 4 or 6 or 8 microphones, all pointing outward in a cardioid pattern. That way
would you use a cardioid or a supercardioid?
I guess it would depend how far away you're trying to capture the sound. Omnidirectional, you would think that omnidirectional would be a good idea, and perhaps if you're in a venue that has a lot of sound going on in different areas, just all around, you might be able to capture a lot of different kinds of sounds from all those omnidirectional mics. But I think that cardioid would give you that uniqueness with all of the microphones, versus like an omnidirectional, which would just pick up a lot of the same material. So I would use a cardioid or a hypercardioid to record, and that's good. Or you can use like a binaural recording, which they make headsets and microphones that basically attach to your ear that give you pretty much emulate what the ears would hear if you were actually there. And then that's where software can come into play with modifying the sound if you turn your head and doing different things with EQing and phasing to kind of achieve that sense of turning around.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that. So essentially, if I understand the ear dynamics, there's a reason it's shaped like that, and the way that our ear canal is made, as well as the hairs inside, they're all made to essentially be sensitive to certain spectrums, and the shape of the ear provides the directionality that we need. And you talked about binaural recording, and I have a pair of condensers that you can actually fit in the ears and use your own, and they're really great for concerts because they think you've got headphones in, but that's another story. But I've seen people create dummy heads that are the exact shape, and they actually put the mics into the canal itself to create that realistic chamber that you're looking for. So I guess that's what you're talking about. And then from there, you can synthesize the environment around it because you've captured it based upon the physical model of the head itself. Is that what I understand?
Correct. Yeah. Correct. And I think that's a good strategy for trying to record three-dimensional audio that's kind of tried and true. And really where you may run into some issues, and I'm sure someone has figured out a way to make this work somehow, that I've seen with projects that's kind of an issue, is just developing these sounds or modifying these sounds so that they fit for various platforms, if that makes sense. Like, you can't always determine exactly how people are going to be listening to it, and so you do kind of have to have some sort of a middleware, especially in game development, that is intelligent in the sense that you have control. And if someone's not listening on earbuds or headphones, or they're not using the Oculus Rift, or not using a surround sound system, that it's treated differently.
You know, that's a good point, and I'll bring this, well, I'll go back to myself here in a moment, but that's a very good point that you do need this middleware, and a couple that I brought in or had in my show notes are those that are used in newer theaters now, and they're called, let's say, Atmos and Auro 3D, and these are in select theaters, and they provide you not only the two-dimensional 360, where you got the speakers in front, side, and rear, but also speakers above you, so that you create this dome type of sound system. But the important thing there is that all your speakers are fixed and the seating is fixed. And as you just indicated, you don't really know once you get outside the theater what you're working with. You know, engineers can tune these theaters specifically to your seating arrangement and take care of dead spots or live spots or reverberation. But when you're in your home, or like you said, even on a mobile device, how do you do that? And in my thoughts is this is where headphones come into play, because there you can create an environment that is self-contained, and there's been a lot of work being done there. And I'm going to bring up a company that Oculus Rift, let's see, I think you can see that now, is partnered with or licensed their three-dimensional middleware, as you speak of it. And when I say middleware in the gaming environment, you're probably familiar with Unity, gaming engine. Have you heard of that? Okay. And well, it appears that Unity seems to be a platform that many people are working with because it's available everywhere. It's available on your PC, Macs, as well as most smartphones, Android and iOS. And a lot of your more popular games for all platforms are being made on that particular system. Well, they've got, as you said, a middleware or plugin that allows you to control the spatial environment in the game. And in my experience with working with it, you essentially can control it by repositioning it. So it's very graphical or intuitive. And in this case, it's mainly for sound effect, but I'm assuming you could probably use that in the development of the composition of your music, so that it would follow you. As I mentioned, you could have acoustic effects that if you went into a cave, the music behind you would fade out. You know, like in the movies when you have the thunderous scene or something, and then they go into a quiet area, and then the music comes down. I could see all this happening dynamically. Are you already working with that, or could you see that being a possibility in the future?
Yes, yeah. I am working with that kind of positioning in the sense that when working with orchestra and mixing orchestra and creating sounds using orchestral instruments, that I am doing positioning that's very similar to that, that employs techniques that are very similar to that as well. And that definitely can be done. It's been done in games. Just if you imagine, a great example is playing a game where there's a TV show that's on the TV, and your character walks up to the TV and they hear the sound, and as they step away, it can do different things like turning the volume down can give the presence that it's further away. Panning it left and right can give the impression that it's to your left or to your right. EQing the sound. If you step behind a wall, having the sound, having the high frequencies of the sound be removed can make it sound like it's muffled, like it's further away. Having it bounce off of a wall, and so thus delaying part of the signal to one of your ears, can give it the presence that it's further away from, you know, your left ear versus your right ear. If it hits your right ear 10 milliseconds sooner than what it hits your left ear, your brain deciphers that as distance. And so there's lots of things that, tricks like, I guess maybe they're old-fashioned tricks that you can do that don't require three-dimensional positioning or a GUI or a middleware to do that kind of depth, creating depth and space that I do with orchestral instruments on a daily basis.
Okay, well, yeah, and you just mentioned one thing that I had forgotten about, but yes, you could add delays to the audio itself to create that spatial presence. I also heard that they actually can shift the phase of the frequency or use Doppler shifting. Let's say if you're moving, that can create realistic where you can software or mathematically to a Doppler shift. And you may have experienced this when a train goes by. The pitch of the sound changes as the train goes by. And now they can do that. So you can create all these things now because the processes are faster. In fact, in some cases, especially creative labs, they have processors specifically for creating sound environment. And I see that happening more and more. Let me bounce back to this company again, RealSpace. And for those of you who may have an Oculus Rift, and if you have any, you can actually go out to, let's see, they have some demos that you can actually download. All right. Sean, have you ever tried out the Oculus Rift?
Yes, yeah, I have. It's pretty awesome. I think in terms of gaming, it has potential to be the future of gaming somehow. Maybe not in its current iteration, but 3D gaming, until you've tried it, it's hard to really describe how kind of awesome it is when it's done well.
I totally agree with you. Example that I keep giving on the show is that Half-Life 2, which is probably, in my opinion, the best example right now of a tremendous game. But when you're playing in this world, before you're always looking at a screen or a window. Now you're that character and you're in the middle of the world, and it's just completely different. The issue that I have, and I've talked about it, is that because your feet aren't moving, but you're moving, that's what creates the illness or the motion sickness with me. And if you're running a lot, that can make it even worse. So I found that if you're in the game, kind of stop, get your breath, and then come back to it. But if you want to try out RealSpace 3D, and by the way, Half-Life does a real good job of sound space too. So if you have an opportunity or have not, get an Oculus Rift and try out Half-Life 2. It is a great example. And but RealSpace 3D has a plugin that you can download plus some examples. The example that they show there, the example build terrain, is for the I can't think of the name, but it's a villa, appears in the Mediterranean that a lot of people have seen using the Unity engine with the Oculus Rift. Well, they've added some examples of the sound, and there's an article I'll put in the show notes of somebody actually trying it out. The example kind of hits you over the head with it, but it's a perfect opportunity to see how the shifting, like if they put a helicopter in it, and you literally look up because that's where the sound is coming from. And again, because you only have headphones on, they're doing this through psychoacoustics, modifying the frequency range, the shift, the Doppler, and all these things that we would normally physically create. They do it mathematically and through algorithms. So it's really neat that we're moving in this direction, and I think it's very important. But the other thing that's very important is the composers like yourself and the sound engineer that have to keep this in mind. So I look forward to you, Sean, and maybe you can give me a sneak peek when you actually do something in the VR world that maybe I can bring it up in a later show. But I do think this is going to be something up and coming, and I do think that the tool sets, which I think you probably have a complete group of them, may have some additional tools for this. I remember the days, I don't know if you remember them, but remember the larger, that's one of the reasons I'm wearing this. This is just a cheap pair of headsets, but I wanted them to be physically big. But remember the days when you had these huge things and they had like 5 speakers in them, actually 2 on each side, maybe 3, and you had a front one, which is like in the beginning or the front of the cones or the cups, and then there was one behind it, and you had this cable that ran off, and you had to plug it into the rear, the front, and the subwoofer, and it was supposedly gave you that full spatial. Did you ever have a set of those?
That might have been a bit before my time, and you know they now have headsets like the Sony wireless gold headsets can do that fake 3D, and for the most part, you really can't tell the difference, and it beats having to install a 5.1 or 7.1 surround sound system in my studio or in my house, where my kids pull the wires and pull the cords, and
so
and I think
what is it again?
It's going to be even more popular.
So
the
what is
Sony
it
wireless gold headset.
Okay, I'll have to look into that. That sounds pretty cool. And it gives you that full spatial environment?
Yeah, yeah, it claims to be able to do. I don't know how they coin it, but it does three-dimensional sound very well. And the perfect game to play with it is the Silent Hill kind of release trailer. I can't remember, was it called
Oh,
IT or HT? The really
I guess I.
scary one
Oh, I don't
on
remember the
PlayStation
title, but
4.
yeah. Oh, is there one on PlayStation 4 now? Don't know of it.
Yeah, I think it's called maybe it's called PT. I can't think of it off the top of my head, but it's a perfect tech demo for the system, and the audio is just phenomenal. And the music in that game does kind of move with the character a little bit, in the sense that it's not constantly just staying still. It's not stationary. But that soundtrack is a lot more sound design. It's a lot more atmospheric than, say, some of the more traditional orchestral stuff that I do. Um, that's becoming very popular with scores now, though, to kind of have a hybrid atmospheric score, and I think that does
Ambient.
enable ambient, yeah,
Hmm.
soundscape composers. Sometimes they refer to
Okay.
themselves as that.
Yeah, I like to
That
listen to
really
those
enables
regard.
you. Mhm.
Yeah, I just wanted to
It's
say
great.
that yeah, sometimes I just listen to soundscapes just to listen to them. Uh, but I'm kind of weird in that area. People say I'm weird. Oh well. But well, we've kind of talked about the 3D side of things as well as sounding in your compositions. You also do trailers, and I think you've also done some music or an actual score for movies. Do you want to give us a list of some of the things that you've done? That I'm not a big
Mhm.
game player, so I couldn't figure out. Maybe some of those games were really popular, but I know of only a couple. Half-Life
Mhm.
2? No. Okay. So could you kind of go run through some of the games for us?
Yeah, the most recognizable titles that I've worked on are Epic Mickey 2 Power of Illusion. So that's the one for Nintendo 3DS, and then I've provided additional music for games like NCAA football. I have a couple additional tracks in that, as well as Heroes of Camelot. And there's a new Hobbit game, a Lord of the Rings
Really?
Hobbit game that's out on iOS that I helped arrange some of that music. It's compositions by a friend of mine whose name's Greg Ron, and I helped kind of arrange and some of those scores, and they recorded them in Seattle. I've worked on films, a lot of documentary films.
I know
I
you
guess
you
none of them
started
are
with.
released yet.
Yeah, mine never got released, so don't hold your breath on that one. So what are some of the documentaries that you've worked with?
One of them, the one that's probably going to be out the soonest, is I think it's about a 2-hour film about the life of Blessed Alberione, who is a priest that's in the process of potentially becoming a saint.
Hmm.
So it kind of follows his life, and he really dedicated his whole life to doing multimedia. And this was back before, this is like in the 40s and 50s, doing a lot with movies and multimedia and radio in Europe, doing a lot of stuff in Europe. So it kind of follows his life, and that's probably a year and a half in the making with the
Wow.
music and doing all the edits and the back and forths and something like that. That music, it's just a really high quality orchestral soundtrack that's just going to be played back in stereo. And in that kind of a case, I just compose the music and hand it off to the mixing engineers, and they just mix it, they balance it, they make sure that it's there to enhance the experience of the documentary, uh, which is there, really, the documentary is there to deliver information in an educational and entertaining way. So it's not really immersive, so it's very different from the game work that I do. Um, but a
Yeah.
lot of the games that I work on don't have immersive three-dimensional music in them, or three-dimensional audio even. A lot of them are very basic iPhone and iPad games that some of the mechanics of them are very simple. They're kind of
Hmm.
like Flappy Bird. where it's like there might only be 2 or 3, 4 minutes in the game. So for them to worry about how to get it to be three-dimensional or how to do anything with it that's out of sight and out of mind.
Now you mentioned you hand this off. Let's go back to the documentary for a moment. So if I understand you correctly, do you hand off a stereo or a multi-track version so that the sound or the mixing engineer can then create the environment that he's looking for? How does that work?
It depends. Sometimes it is just a stereo mix. Often anymore, it is a multi-track. It'll be like 16 to 24 stems of different instruments, so strings, brass, woodwinds, percussion, choir, synthesizers, and a lot of that's just so that they can dial in the mix, and if there's something about the strings that they don't like and they're in the last 1% of finishing the project, they don't need to come back to me and get changes from me. They can kind of just manipulate that source material to fit their needs. Should they need to edit something or chop 4 seconds out, they can do that editing on their end. And with games, often, if I deliver stems, it's to do adaptive audio. It's a game that's maybe like a shooter where there will be a percussion track that once you're low on health or you're about to win or you're going to die, it then fades up the percussion track or has some kind of a drum roll and then cues in the percussion track. That's more common for mobile games, but I think that one of the things holding that back, dynamic and interactive audio, a little bit in mobile games, as well as three-dimensional audio, is really the amount of disk space storage that it takes for audio, for uncompressed audio. It can consume a lot of storage on these devices, and a lot of the people that I work with, they tend to make games that are like 50 to 100 megabytes because they want to fit in those over-the-air requirements so people can download it over the network.
Oh, that's a good point.
So
some of these new VR examples are fairly large, close to 500 to a gigabyte. So that is a very good point. You want to keep your game streamlined, especially for an iOS or an Android device. Well, we're already at 44.
Go ahead. Oh, sorry. I think there's a little late there.
Yeah, I've noticed that as well.
I think there's probably about 5 seconds. But like setting up, 5 or 6 or 8 directional mics is that then if you're really going for that high definition experience, which you need to because these screens are retina displays, it's not standard definition. Everything on it looks crystal clear. It needs to sound crystal clear. And now Apple's talking about having headsets come out that connect via the Lightning connector or whatever that's going to have really high fidelity audio. 256 kilobit per second MP3. You need to do it in uncompressed audio or WAV files, and then if you have all these mics set up.
What is it? The Panoto? I can't remember the name of it, but it was the new HD audio player that was on Kickstarter, done by I think Neil Young. That I can't remember if it's again uncompressed, but the sample rate and the bit rate is, I think it's like 24 bits at 96 or even 120 sample rate. Now, what is your opinion of that? Do you think that's overboard?
Yeah. If there's any audio people watching, I'm sure I'm going to get some emails. I think that having high sample rates and high bit rates is just like when you're recording video. That if you're recording everything at standard definition and then are editing everything at standard definition and rendering out at standard definition, there is going to be some artifacting and aliasing. As opposed to if you're recording at 4K or 5K or 6K or 8K or whatever, and then kind of doing your down converting from there. In audio, it's the same way that that you want to record at the highest possible fidelity, even if it's just for archiving purposes, so that when you're rendering files down, that you're not sacrificing any of the quality that's there. And a lot of plugins now actually can take advantage of higher sample rates. And I work with some reverb plugins here that work with sample rates that are over 96 kilohertz. And I do believe that, like with reverb, that's incredibly important because there's a lot going on with harmonics way above what we can hear. You know, tens of thousands of hertz above what we can hear, that I think is incredibly important for music and will be in the future for spatial sound. And really, when we reach a point that storage is no longer a concern, and we're at the point now where it can do a lot of this manipulation of sound, like you said, and processing in real time, there's nothing that's stopping us from having just insanely high quality audio. Maybe other than speakers, having 100 speakers everywhere, which is
well, there's actually,
cumbersome.
I didn't want to bring it up, but there is somebody who's created a sound environment. That's why I was asking about you. It's similar to yours, except they're like line after line of speakers. The whole room is filled with it to create that full sonic environment, which to me is overdoing it. But I guess if you got the money or you're doing an experiment, that's the direction to go. So you're saying from a studio perspective, that's where high quality sound is, but you know, once you get down, you're saying that maybe 44.1, 16 bits is really all most people need. Well, most people are listening to MP3s, so going back
on a subway
CD probably
train.
sounds
or on a TV set that's you know, got terrible speakers, or on the radio in their car. Or
even
an
DS
iPad that's
iPad.
got, you know, it's like, oh great, you have a DS that you have very little bass frequencies. The high frequencies get kind of ringy on it. That even if you do high quality audio, you're going to have to end up making some adjustments here and there to fit the device. And I think it's exciting. I think a lot of music and musicians and labels and producers are not going to be able to take full advantage of it yet.
Well, we could talk all day, but probably our listeners are going to need to do something else, and I think, Sean, I've taken enough of your time. We're about 50 minutes into this, and I only wanted you for 40, so I apologize for running late, but I think this is an interesting subject, and I think it was great working with you, and hopefully we'll get a chance now as this podcast becomes more popular. Maybe I can convert my music back over like we originally thought about. But, you know, I want to leave it with a song that you did for the holidays, and hopefully, what was the title of it? I saw it on SoundCloud, so I downloaded it. Was it Music Foots with Sean Sings? You mind if I play that in the background?
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Hopefully I turned it. Can you hear it?
Yeah.
So why don't you talk a little bit about this? This is your wife, isn't it?
No, this isn't Christmas music, actually. This is from something else that
did
was
I get
written
the wrong?
at the same time. Yeah, I think so. It sounds, the beginning is kind of similar.
Okay, what's the title of the one?
It's called O Come Divine Messiah.
Okay, I've got it. I'm going to play that. There we go. Got the wrong one. All right, can you hear the right one?
Not yet.
Oh, how about now?
Yeah, there we go.
Now, kind of tell us the backstory. This is your wife that you're doing a duet with, and it's just, in my opinion, stunning. As I said in my email, this was just my wife and I looked at each other and said, man, they sound great. So not only can you compose music, but you both have great voices. So I just want to
thank you.
I just want to leave our episode here with this music in the background. Fade to Sean in the cornfields out in rural Ohio. So again, this is another episode of All Things 3D. Our interview with Sean Beeson. He is a sound and music wizard, and I've known few years. So check out some of the video games as well as some documentaries. And oh, there's a cat too. Look that one up too. I'll put some links in the show notes. And I really appreciate you coming on, Sean. So I'll just let this finish off.
Yep, thank you for having me.
Thank you, Sean.
Shall come to be always right. Dear Savior, face, come to earth. These heaven and night, and show your face, and bid us ever you come in peace and meekness.
To our listeners out there, have a happy holidays, and we'll see you in the new year. Check us out. We're going to be doing a full CES exploration starting on the 6th of January. So again, happy holidays and a happy new year. Bye.